Welcome back to this webinar series on acoustic, thermal, electromagnetic, mechanical metamaterials. Today we have the great pleasure to welcome Philippe Lalanne, who is the Director of Research at CNRS at the Institut d'Optique d'Aquitaine in Bordeaux, so France. And Philippe is going to talk about metasurfaces, enhanced blazing and appearance control. And please note that his webinar will be recorded and then available online afterwards. Philippe, it's your turn. Philippe.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Sébastien. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to present some of the work that we have done and that we are doing at the Institut d'Optique d'Aquitaine. With this first slide, I just want to emphasize the great variety of geometrical features that are patterned in various materials nowadays and which are used in metasurfaces. And even in that panel, I have not included the metasurfaces which are fabricated with metals. The second slide here summarizes what was the field 20 or 30 years ago. And you see that people were fabricating metasurfaces in many materials, such as high-index TiO2 material, like silicon, gallium arsenide, but also infused silica. Metal was, in fact, at that time, completely absent from visible application, if I could say. And they were just used in the infrared here, in this work performed in Erlangen, but I will give a small aperçu about that. Therefore, there are similarities, of course, between old and recent work in the field. And therefore, in the first part of my talk, I would like to retrace, the evolution of ideas, I think, to better appreciate where we are and where we can go. Huygens metasurfaces was not investigated in early days, and it is presently receiving considerable attention. I have been working on this new type of metasurface only recently for nonlinear optic application. I have found some fundamental limitations that I would like to share with you in the second part of my talk. And finally, in the last part, I will present our most recent work on controlling appearance with disordered metasurface. This is probably the most innovative part. Let me start by the beginning, right? With the Fresnel or the Echlet, I don't know how to say, profiles here. Of course, everyone knows that you can control, can control the phase locally by etching more or less, some substrate. And these kind of Fresnel lenses or grading, it's up to you. They have, let's say, two fundamental limitations. The first one is that, of course, it's blazed. It's efficient only for the wavelengths for which it's designed. So, which is, you see the 8 here. So that's the wavelengths. And then there is also a second limitation that everyone knows, which is a shadow zone. You see here, where I just use ray tracing, and just I plot this ray, and you see you have a Snell reflection there, right? But if it is designed correctly, and that's easy, basically the refraction here, direction is also coincides with the, I would say, with the grating law equation. But for the rays which are impinging into this shadow zone, you have first refraction, but then you have a total internal reflection onto the vertical facet. And you imagine that those rays, they are not going to interfere constructively into far field, into the first order. This is ray tracing, but this is confirmed by electromagnetic theory. You have a calculation, an old one. Basically, you see that in this red area where the field is intense, you think that the flow of the pointing vector is following basically this law of refraction. And that's bad, right? That's what's bad. This, and the effect of this shadow is that the Echlet or a diffractive optical element are not efficient for large deviation angle. And here you have theoretical values computed for for unpolarized light as a function of the deviation angle. So in fact, what is varying here, you see, is a grating period, right? And small grating period correspond to large deviation angles. And of course, the fraction which is seen by the shadow zone is increasing as theta is increasing or as the period is decreasing, right? And you see that the theoretical predictions show that basically the efficiency drop linearly with the deviation angle. So it means that you are able to manufacture efficient H-LET grating or H-LET diffractive element only if the deviation remains small. In the 90s, I would say that photonic research was starting to enjoy the benefits of nanotechnologies. I mean, photonic crystal was nascent, or plasmonic. I mean, the second burst of plasmonic was ahead. I mean, basically advanced deep submicron resolution patterning was available only in a few labs in the world. But people were starting to be excited by manufacturing, let's say, artificial dielectric with effective medium theory. So the idea at that time was to say, I mean, instead of controlling the phase by the H depths here, we could try to synthesize a gradient index, which is, let's say, parallel to the substrate here, and vary this n and implement. This is difficult to do, by the way, with the discontinuity here. And so they wanted to do that by effective medium theory. And I think the first one who proposed that, there were people working in Erlangen at that time in Germany. In their optics letter paper that they published, I mean, what is just for fun, I mentioned that, of course, it was difficult for them to fabricate it. So what they fabricated is some effective medium theory, I don't know, for water wave. And you see, this is the kind of component they manufactured. You see the water wave picture here with a deviation into the first order, which is quite efficient. And they were saying the duty cycle increases in such a way that a linear increase in phase is expected along the component. Thus, an index gradient or a microprism, they were calling that, is emulated. So that was basically, I would say, the birth of the field. But indeed, I have to acknowledge, I mean, it's always the case, except maybe you can find a Russian guy who did it before, or you can find, when you are an opticist, you can find people working in microwaves. And of course, I mean, lens, and for exactly the same reason as us nowadays, I mean, they were using, in fact, they were fabricating with this copper strips here. They were trying to manufacture high index material so that they can make the lens thinner. Let's say back to optics here. I would say that following the water wave demonstration, I mean, rapidly in the 90s, they fabricated in the infrared at 10 micron. They fabricated with metal some highly efficient blades into the first order. That was grating that were fabricated. Later on, people work also on telecom wavelengths and the near infrared after that. And at visible frequencies, basically using SiO2 initially, the first devices were obtained, let's say, in quartz substrate or silica substrate directly by etching. And with sometimes already at that time, extremely nice fabrication technology. I mean, people, for instance, in Cornell, I mean, they were extremely well equipped here. There's beautiful work in Caltech. It was Axel Scherer at that time who fabricated that. It's really beautiful devices. But I mean, the fact is that the first results were disappointing in the sense that the components that have been fabricated were offering efficiency that were smaller than the efficiency of the H-LET counterpart. So you have a technology which is more expensive, nicer, but at the end you don't get better than a low-cost H-LET profile. So that was a little bit disappointing. In fact, it was important to realize that the effective medium inspiration was not the good idea. In fact, to understand that, I mean, imagine that you really have access to an ultimate technology and that you can manufacture features which are, let's say, 10 nanometer. And then in that case, what you are going to synthesize is really an effective medium. And then you will synthesize a gradient index. I mean, you will fabricate, for instance, a grating here. I'm not showing the profile. I'm showing the gradient index from 1 to n here, which is increasing. So vertically is uniform, the index, but it's a gradient which is parallel to the substrate. And then, if you shine by a plane wave, then you have the mirage effect. So that means that the light is going to be bent. And then by bending, you will also exhibit a total internal reflection at the discontinuity between the high index and the low index. And then you will have, again, the shadowing zone. So it means that effective medium theory was not the good solution, in fact. And the good solution that is nowadays adopted, in fact, was considering the fact that you should implement some kind of waveguiding effect. So you should consider high index nano waveguides, which are arrayed in that way. And at the end, you can implement some kind of a phased array antenna, which is operating at the optical wavelength. So each waveguide you see in this, let's say, electromagnetic field calculation, I mean, in fact, the light coupled into the waveguide is guided. You see the pointing vector is vertical, and then acquire a phase, a propagation phase, which is given by the height and by the effective index of your waveguide. And so you see that the shadowing effect is cancelled in that picture. The bad side, of course, is that those pillars here, those waveguides here, they are not really guiding. So those guys are not efficient. So, of course, when you design the device, I mean, you can eliminate those small pillars, but that means you have to fabricate the other one with even taller. And that's difficult, of course, to fabricate. Let me summarize the design consideration that we were looking at that time, okay, to implement this kind of optical phaser, which is based on independent nanowave guide array. First point, I mean, I should emphasize, we should not etch glass. We should actually etch a high index material, because if you have a high index material, then the waveguide, the confinement is better. So you can make those waveguides more independent. You can have less crosstalk. Also, you should control the spacing accurately. You don't have a lot of degree of freedom at that level, because if you make it too short here, basically you are going to introduce crosstalk. You are also going to go to effective medium theory, and then you are going to have this shadow zone that I discussed before. So it should not be too small, but at the same time, it should not be too large. Because here, what I try to show here, you see it as a super block mode here. You see of this array here in red. So this one is the one that you excite in the array and which is giving the good delay, the good phase at the output of the component. But if the spacing is too large, then it becomes multi-mode. You have this anti-symmetry modes which appears. So that means that it's balanced. I mean, you don't have a lot of degree of freedom for L. And based on this principle, we fabricated TiO2, let's say, grating on silica. Here, as you can see, here you see that the period of the grating is composed of 5 nano waveguides in that case. And in fact, we fabricated a series of this grating by varying the grating period. And here you have the efficiency that we measure experimentally as a function of the angle of incidence. And of course, compared to series, it's not as good here for small deviation angle, because for small deviation angle, the period is very large, right? And you have many pillars in it. So some of them fall down. But what is in fact important in that case is at large deviation angle for small period, we were able to achieve high diffraction efficiency, as you can see, and much larger, in fact, than the theoretical. The experimental value is larger than the theoretical value obtained for the H-LEC. And so that was something like a good news at that time, right? You can do better than that was one done before at low cost. So it's higher cost, but it's at least you achieve something better. Encouraged by this result, I mean, we also fabricated a lens which was operating with a vertical cavity surface emitting laser. At that time, they were basically discovered, right? And so we were very happy to try to use them in the lab. So the numerical aperture of VCSEL is not very large, but to make the story more complicated, we assume that we have to collimate the VCSEL and also to deviate by 20 degrees the collimating beam. So that means that half of the lens surface is covered, in fact, with zone widths, which are smaller than 3 wavelengths. So it's a challenging component. And we measure a diffraction efficiency of 80%. We also, in part at least, measure the aberrations of the lens device. I cannot prevent myself also to show in this historical perspective the work that was performed in Jena, in Germany by Uwe Zeitner and his colleagues here. And basically what is remarkable, I mean, there, even when I show that today is that the size of the grating, they fabricated a grating with a period of 315 micron. The size of the grating is 20 centimeter by 15 centimeter, and they achieved an excellent uniformity over all the device with an efficiency which was about, if I remember well, 80%. And this device has been sent into space, as you showed. Also, rapidly, let me mention that this concept of nano waveguide has been also applied in integrated optics. Basically, you have many works that you can find in the literature on that. More recently, metal lenses with very high numerical aperture have been manufactured at Harvard for operation with blue, red, and green light, as you can see there. The lens were fabricated by etching TiO2 layers on glass, right? And were basically relying on the same waveguiding effect as we considered in the 90s. Just the coding scheme here was different. I mean, they were using here, you see, geometrical phase to encode the phase of the lens, implying that the lens, in fact, was operating with circular polarization. Our earlier work was not cited in the Science article that which is very famous and that Harvard published. Also, it was quoted in previous article by the group. Additionally, I would like to say that our work has received many criticism in many plenary talks given by Federico Capasso, who was emphasizing that our performance was lower due to some fabrication mistake or I don't know. And to understand why, it's interesting to compare the performance. And here, this is considering the Harvard data are corrected by 4%. You see that the diffraction efficiency that they realize, I mean, here is 86 for the blue, 70, and so on. So if you correct for that, I would say that only the blue lens has an efficiency which is larger than ours. But further, I note that in this lens, the spacing that they have encoded is similar to the spacing that we do, 0.47, right? But as you increase the spacing, the device becomes less and less. You see the spacing increases from green to red. The device becomes less and less efficient, and this is due to the multi-mode operation that I mentioned before. So to be fair, our old lens has a lower numerical aperture, but considering that it was off-axis, I think the case is not very sensitive. And conversely, you should consider that our lens is working with and is insensitive to the polarization. Working, it means working for any polarization, where this lens is working only for circular cross polarization. Nowadays, there are also completely new functionality that were not investigated 20 or 30 years ago. For instance, at Caltech, but Andrei Pharaon and his group has shown that the complete control of phase and polarization can be simultaneously achieved by controlling the birefringence. They are controlling the birefringence at the level of each individual, nanopillar here, which is made in amorphous silicon. And they have a sub-wavelength resolution, of course. Nowadays, I would say it's much easier to fabricate metal surfaces than 20 years ago, of course. There are also much more application. And optical phaser based on nano waveguide are finding many new applications for, let's say, quantum optics, for nonlinear optics. And people are trying to make them broadband, which is a very important issue. But that's also very challenging. And also they try to make it programmable. However, what I would like to say to conclude this first part is that nanotechnology remains expensive when you use it. Just if you use it, I mean, you should be paid back, I would say, in return. And for beam steering, the payback of this is that the fact that the nano waveguide allow you to control phase at a sub-wavelength scale, as required for large numerical aperture. And there is no equivalent counterpart with traditional H-LED technology. And this is especially true. I mean, if you consider this kind of device here, where basically they can provide, they control also, in addition to polarization, and can provide two different, I would say, holograms, if I could say, according to the polarization with which. So there is no equivalent. It's very difficult to do that with thin film technology and with a sub-wavelength resolution. So I think that's, but the penalty, of course, is that you have to manufacture high index, let's say, quite large aspect ratio in a high index material that also prevent you to have easy replication. I mean, you cannot use, for instance, embossing like this is used. Okay, I am finished with this evolution of ideas. I wanted to insist on the fact that we need to have to sample phase or polarization, whatever, at the sub-wavelength dimension. That's a justification for really using nanotechnology compared to H-LED writing. In the second part of my talk, I will consider a different approach that does not require a large aspect ratio, and that is also receiving considerable attention presently. In this approach, which is much more recent, was not existing 20 years ago, the phase is not controlled by a propagation, right? The phase is controlled by a Mie resonance. Now, let me just develop the idea, right, rapidly. So there is basically, you combine two ideas. Here you consider, let's say, a nano-resonator or nanoparticle, and if you, it's well known, it's Kircher condition, but for those who doesn't know, if you can have a multipolar expansion for this particle like this, and if you match the magnetic dipole with the electric dipole, if P is equal to M, basically you implement forward scattering only. So you have no backwards back scattering. And the second idea, which is proposed in the Huygens metasurfaces here, the fact that when you have a resonance, basically you have a pole. So here, this is a frequency dependence. Here, the resonance wavelength, which is imaginary and complex, sorry, which is complex. And that you see that as you go across the resonance, basically you have a pi phase shift. So in the Huygens metasurface idea, what you combine, in fact, is you plan to combine two resonance, one for P, the other one for M. So you can achieve twice pi, so 2 pi, so that's excellent. And at the same time, if you do that, if you achieve P equal M, then you will have unitary transmission. And this is summarized on this graph. I mean, it's like Huygens principle. About say you scatter forward, and if you control the phase by this trick with the resonance, basically you are going to implement any kind of beam steering. This is the first realization. What you see is that compared to before, it is a super thin, right? I mean, the silicon, let's say, disk here, maybe the thickness is something like 200 or 300 nanometers, so it's much easier to fabricate than the previous example. And this is taken from, here you see what has been done is Baker and his co-worker, what he did is, that's calculation. So he designed a silicon disk array. So this is for a silicon disk array. And then what he showed that basically if you scan the wavelengths here like this across the resonance that have to be matched in frequency, basically you achieve a 2 pi phase shift here. And you see at the same time, the transmission is almost unitary. So in practice, you don't change the wavelengths, but you change the diameter of the nano disk. So that means that if you tune the nanometer of the disk, what you expect from this curve is that basically you can monitor the phase over 2 pi, and then you can achieve each time a large phase. So recently for nonlinear application, we were working on nonlinear holograms, in fact. When basically what we did is we tried to test that for at least for the linear case at the beginning. And the results are shown on this part. So we take exactly the same design as in the previous slide, right? And we computed the absolute efficiency as a function of the normalized metaprism period. So that means, what does it mean? When it is 5 wavelengths here, that means that you have in fact 16 of these meta atoms, of these nanodisks with a graded dimension which are varying and which are assuming, according to the lookup table here, which are in fact providing the phase that is wanted, I mean the 2 pi phase gradient. And we were quite surprised at when we get those results. We believe that we were making a mistake somewhere, but actually, I mean, it doesn't work. The efficiency is very low. If you compare to this nano waveguide approach, I mean, you have efficiency, which is, let's say, about 90% for a 5 wavelength component. So we wanted to explain that. And here is a plot here of let's say, the meta grading, which is this one here, which is composed of 16. You know, the period of the grading is 5 wavelengths, and you have 16 disks here, which are arrayed one after each other with a gradual variation. And here what you show is a near field that we have calculated with COMSOL. And okay, so that's one result. So we shine by a plane wave at normal incidence, we calculate the near field. That's it, that's one thing. And in the second case, so that's an hypothetical images, if I could say. What we assume is that for each nano disk here of this dimension that you choose, we assume that they are in an array like this. There it's a periodic array with this grading period here, which is, and we show the near field. And what you can see when you, so it's something which is based here on the lookup table design, right? And what you can see that there is a significant difference between what actually occur and what you wish to implement. The difference is not too large here for in the middle of the grading. Why I call it in the middle? Because the boundary here, the boundary of the grading where you have an index change, if I could say, or a phase, no, not index, a phase change is there basically. You have a big here, you have a breakdown of the periodicity, which is extremely important in that region. And you see that around this, let's say, chain, 2 pi phase change, in fact, you see that there is significant difference between what is actually occurring in the device and what you should end. And in fact, it's obvious to understand what's happened. In this region, they are ultra sensitive to the element. In this region, right, you break down the periodic symmetry, whereas in that region, basically, it moves only slightly. And what appears is a shadow zone. Okay, you see that you have something like 5 elements where the response, which is calculated for the array, is completely different from the response of the actual device. And this of course can be explained by considering that you have an electromagnetic coupling, and by considering also that the coupling due to the electrical dipole and the magnetic dipole are quite different, and it's very difficult to match them in a good way. I would like to say that, of course, when I saw that, I could imagine that maybe we can optimize the tune, refine, refer to electromagnetic theory to change, to tune, I mean, the geometry to make it better. People have done that, and the result is that it's not working very efficiently. And I think that the reason is that because there are fundamental limitations that I would like to discuss. And the fundamental limitation for me, they are simply due to the use of a resonator, of a nano resonator. Because if you have, remember what you want to do is you want to control the phase of the element, let's say at a sub-wavelength scale. So the actual field, I mean, if you have a resonance, you have a strong crosstalk. So that means that the actual field, which is driving each meta-atom, each nanodisk, if you want, is no longer dominantly due to the incident field, because the field is strong here. You have a resonance, and so the crosstalk is enhanced. So that's the first point. And the second point, I think, is even more fundamental. I mean, if you have a resonance like this, the field is large, and of course, you have a funneling effect. The actual cross-section of your meta-atom is indeed much larger than the physical cross-section. So if you want to have a correct operation with resonance, in fact, what you should do, you should not make an overlap between the cross-section. So that means that you should set a quite large distance, which is equal to the cross-section between adjacent meta-atoms. So it means simply that you will not be able to achieve a sub-wavelength resolution for the sampling of your phase. So intrinsically, this is what I am saying today, intrinsically, if you use a resonance, you will not be able to achieve this sub-wavelength sampling of the phase. And remembering the optical phaser, you use nano and you have something in return, right? You may control the phase with the phaser, with nano waveguides. It's the same for the integrated electronic circuits. An important requirement for success of these circuits is that every transistor in the circuit can be driven independently. And nanotechnology is just use them to reduce the dimension, to scale down, to push the integration. Here, if you use a resonance, you cannot have an independent control of the adjacent case, as I mentioned, and therefore, you rely on advanced technology. I mean, the aspect ratio is not so large, but still you need to fabricate it. And you don't, I think you are not paid back. I mean, according to our calculation, you have a shadow zone, which is about 5 to 10 meta-atoms, a few wavelengths. I think that's risky. Okay, I'll go now to the last part of my talk, where there I would like to introduce a new functionality for meta surfaces, for which, I mean, we really need, I think, high index nanoscale effect. Okay, let me start with a review of many beautiful work, not review, a short description of many beautiful work, and starting by the colors with nature. And you have your ordered photonic structures. I mean, ordered, I mean periodic, basically periodic photonic structure can produce, of course, iridescence with vivid structural color that depend on both the illumination and viewing angles. And for periodic structure, I would say that basically the coloration mechanism have been intensively studied and are well understood nowadays. In addition to this periodic or ordered structure, there exists also another important class of photonic structures where that possess, I would say, a short range order. That means that it's not fully random, right? But it's something like an amorphous photonic structure where at short distance, you have a structural correlation, I would say. And it has been shown that natural amorphous structure can produce non-iridescent, that's very important, non-iridescent coloration. This means that the color is observed for any observation direction. And one of the best example, a beautiful example here is the case of this parrot. That has been published something like 10 years ago. People who are using meta surface also, they have worked intensively on, and they have obtained beautiful results. I mean, try to reproduce the natural color. And in that case, with artificial meta surface, if I could say, not natural one, what people rely is on resonance, either a plasmon resonance, like in this example here, or me resonance, which is good there, with dielectric. This is with metal, this is with dielectric. And then you see that they have I think this is a beautiful result. So this is before metal deposition, and then with metal deposition, they get resonance. See how does it change? It's remarkable. And they obtain vivid colors and a large palette of vivid colors. So all that is absolutely very nice. What I would like to, I would say that color, right, or color chromaticity are not the only attribute that allow you to, I mean, how to say, if you want to control appearance, I mean, appearance is not just color, right? In appearance, you have many attributes that are not just simple, I would say, chromaticity. As is shown on this figure that I take from Roland Fleming in Yale, right? By controlling the surface roughness here, you don't change really the color, but you considerably change the visual appearance. And appearance, of course, impact fine arts, I would say like sculpture or painting, but also applied arts and commercial product design. So it's extremely important. Normally, our visual perception is entirely determined by what is called the bidirectional scattering distribution function, I mean the BRDF, okay? So what is the BRDF? It's very simple. It tells you the property, the scattering property of your surface. And so here, and so it's a highly multidimensional function because it should give you the response for any polarization of the incident light, any angle of the incident light, and any wavelengths also. And what you should have at the end of that is basically the light which is scattered into the specular direction, and the light also which is scattered, in fact, in all the directions. Here I am talking about, let me be a little bit more precise, right? I'm talking about the scattered light, right? So the scattered light has a diffusion, has a coherent contribution, which is a specular light, okay, blue, and also has a diffuse coherent. And I'm talking about the scattering like this. So in addition to what is important and I want to mention is that the color, something which is very important is how the color perception change with the illumination condition or viewing angles. If you are a customer and you buy an object and if you can, let's say, handle it in your hand, what you are going to do is you are going to change the orientation of the object just to automatically do that. So it means that for you, how does it look when you change the viewing condition is very important. What we propose here is to control actually the appearance with disordered metasurfaces. And for that, we have many degrees of freedom. I would say that like in previous work on the color control, I mean, at the nanoscale, here we can control, of course, the resonance of that object. And with that, we are going, of course, to control the color that is going to be scattered. But also, you can, additionally, you have additional effects which have not been considered earlier. The fact that you can have at the mesoscopic scale, if I could say, you can have multiple scattering. That means that this nanoparticle can interact with the substrate. That can change the resonance, this is well known, but also can interact with the neighbors. And finally, at the upper level, if I could say, at the macroscopic scale here, of course, you can have, you have to control all the diffuse, the specular light, you can have a secant scattering, you are on a curved surface and everything is extremely complicated. So the challenge is how to accurately predict the appearance of disordered metasurface. And for that, what we have used is a combination of nanoscale electromagnetism, so that we can take into account the nanoscale. And also we use multiple scattering, so that we can take into account almost rigorously the mesoscale interference that appear in the system. And also we use spectral rendering with ray optics, if I could say, to predict what's happened at the macroscopic scale. So we go really from the nanoscale in this tool, in this new tool that we have designed. And finally, I would like to conclude by acknowledging people. I mean, first I would like to acknowledge, let's say, Pierre Chavel, that basically he was my PhD advisor, I don't know, 30 years ago, and I'm still collaborating on metasurfaces with him, still writing some paper together. I would like to acknowledge also Edmond Cambril, who fabricated the TiO2 lens and grating for us a long time ago. The work on the Huygens metasurface has been performed in collaboration, I would say, with MPQ in Paris and with Stanford University. And for the part on the disordered metasurface, the last part of my talk, I would like to acknowledge two people. I would say I forgot to mention that during my talk, but it's when you have a metasurface, a disordered metasurface with known correlation or known statistical distribution, right? It's extremely difficult, in fact, to calculate, to predict the BRDF. It's a long-standing issue in disordered media to calculate that. And the model that we use to put into the rendering engine has been developed by Kevin Vink in our laboratory. Also, I would like to thank Romain Pakanowski, right, who was generated using the rendering machine, the rendering engine that is developing or has generated the images I show you today. I would like then to also thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philippe, for this very nice talk. I think there will be lots of questions. So please, people, come forward with any questions you would have in your mind, you know, naive or very advanced question. So you need